My name's Jenny Lau. I've been practicing Ashtanga yoga since the tail end of 2013, I'd say, so over 10 years.
Yeah.
And it always takes about half an hour to explain what I do, but in one sentence, I am a writer, community chef, and community organizer. I primarily use food to bring together people from different backgrounds, and I am also associated with an East and Southeast Asian community centre in Dalston, which is where I carry out a lot of my activities. At the tail end of 2013, I was taking a 3-month break from work. I was very burnt out. I went backpacking around Southeast Asia, having a very delayed kind of, not even gap year, but gap 3 months. I was 28 years old, 29. I was sort of dabbling in a bit of vinyasa yoga, doing the odd class here and there. I hadn't done much before, and I walked into this quite traditional Ashtanga shala in Laos, in Luang Prabang, and there was a guy called Craig teaching. And of course I just followed along. I didn't really know what I was doing. Went back the second day, and the next day I had to leave. But it always stuck with me, that Ashtanga class, and I obviously didn't know much about the system, about the school. And when I got back to London, I sought out the nearest Ashtanga class, which happened to be Susan Bish's program at the Yoga Place, which is now sadly closed. But Yoga Place is the oldest yoga centre in London that started Ashtanga. And she's brilliant, you know. So I obviously learned Ashtanga the wrong way, which is to go to a weekly lead primary on the weekends. And because I think I was like physically quite capable of getting into all the poses, getting into them wasn't an issue, but I still had this, I think, quite surface, superficial idea of how it should be learned. And I remember she would say, come and try the Mysore practice. And I thought, no, that's too much. And I also don't want to do this self-practice thing. It sounds very daunting early in the morning. So I did lead primary for a year. Then I moved away to Stockholm, and I didn't practice for a good year and a half. And it was during a time when I was going through a lot of difficulty in my life and having to make big decisions that I felt this pull back to the mat. And I remember speaking to my therapist at the time, and he was saying, like, what grounds you? You know, what would help you to make these big decisions? And I said, you know what, I think I need to go back to Ashtanga. I found a Mysore studio, which was on my street. It had been there all along. And from the moment I started the Mysore practice, I have not stopped. At the time, it was maybe, I think she was only teaching 3 days a week, but I very soon moved back to London, which was the big decision I had to make. And that's when I started a daily Mysore practice with my old teacher, Adam Keane. And now I am, oh my Lord, I'm somewhere in 4th series. I'm about to learn Marichyasana H. Would you believe?
Does it go up there?
Would you believe it goes to Marichyasana H?
Wow.
And I probably practice 5 days a week maximum. I don't ever do 6. So if you're practicing up to 4th series, it would probably look like definitely 1 day primary, 1 day of just intermediate, 3, maybe 4 days of 3rd plus 4th tacked on. Some days I'll just do 3rd. And if I'm practicing at home, I do very modified combination of the series as it suits me.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's several things. Probably there have been physical challenges, but I think no more than other people have struggled with. Probably the greatest challenges for me are, I have this kind of like frenetic mind, and being on the mat, I can actually go through probably a few hundred thoughts during one practice. I don't know, that's probably quite normal for people.
I would say so. Well, I mean, that's my anyway.
And that's one of my resolutions this year, actually, is to find ways to quiet the mind. Seems weird to say this after 10 years of practice, but I still struggle with it.
Maybe it takes that long to realise that you're distracted, you know?
Yeah, and it's more, I think more that in the first few years when you're really focusing, you know, focusing on getting the Tristana right, on getting the posture right, what's the next pose, then you're really in that state of focus. And now I'm able to practice in a flow state.
Yeah.
So it actually leaves my mind to be free to have all these thoughts.
Yeah. Because you've kind of automated the physical aspect of it. There's such a difference to the character of the practice when you focus on the sensations rather than these thoughts that can be really alluring, because sometimes you get really insightful kind of things from the flow state. So your challenge is the more mental aspect.
That's one challenge. And I would say another big challenge that I probably had to navigate in the past was lifestyle, and especially if you're in a relationship and cohabiting, for example. Not even if you're not cohabiting, because we have this famously ascetic lifestyle. But with my ex-partner, actually, he was very supportive of the practice eventually. But when I first started getting into it and started getting up super early to, go and practice, and I don't think we were cohabiting at the time, actually. He was quite suspicious. He was very wary.
Right.
And I think he didn't want to lose me to something.
Right.
But as soon as he saw that it was changing me and that I was becoming a better person, I think, he was willing to sort of accommodate it, and we reached this place of compromise. And in the end, when we did cohabit, he loved spinning and going to the gym, so he would get up super early, go and do that, and we'd actually have this very synergistic lifestyle. But it was challenging.
Yeah.
And learning to compromise, especially with this kind of very rigid type A person, which I am, is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just like the skill of relating, I suppose, isn't it?
And I do think, you need to be able to practice yoga off the mat. And I don't think it's about being this really sort of like tight, protocol-driven person.
Yeah.
If anything, the challenge has been to like loosen up and take care of myself and relax, especially as I get older.
Yeah.
I've never had a problem with discipline, let's say. So the challenge for me is to go to the place of discomfort. What if I did lie in and do nothing? And that is one of the hardest things. What if I just emptied the mind and had no thought, and I can't bear the thought of that?
I definitely have aspects of that, and I also have propensity to just take the path of least resistance as well. I notice that in me as well. That's why when I see someone like you, and I'm like, wow, you're doing all these amazing things. And something you didn't mention as well is like you're a musician, and you're an accomplished musician. And so when I'm like, how? Especially when the asana practice is so rigid, to understand how different personalities deal with it and how they get themselves every day on the mat.
I would say that all my practices and disciplines are essentially strings of the same bow.
Okay.
When I practice yoga, it's like music to me.
Okay.
And I find it to be a very creative time on the mat. Any musician who's classically trained, let's say, knows the value of scales, but also that when you reach a certain level of accomplishment, you get to this really nice flow state, like the sweet spot. That's kind of what I love about any form of practice, and it's always been about practice and process rather than achievement for me. And you might notice that there are a few musicians in the room, like Juliana, there's you, there's me, there's creative people, there's also weirdly lots of architects.
Didn't know that.
Maybe there's a link there, but I think because we speak this is like language, but it's language and it's process, and there's something in it that really attracts us to that, like working on the fiddly little thing in our own zone on the mat.
Actually, I'm really delighted that we brought up the topic of being a musician. Just curious what you think about this, but for me, when I started doing yoga, I was just so happy that I could practice something and improve on something, and the outcome wasn't a performance, And I was so impressed with all these people in this room doing these amazing things with their bodies for no one else but themselves. And there's something beautiful about that. And also something else that came to mind as you were talking was, with music practice, it is very dexterous, so like very fine
Yeah.
detail. And something about yoga is like it's quite gross, quite as in like large, and the movements. Obviously, there are finer details, but it's such a relief to be like, I can kind of obviously
That's
alignment is good,
fascinating.
but
I agree about the grossness, but I think there are certain days where I'm like, I'm going to work on my little finger today.
Okay.
And I will consciously, because even the way you put pressure on one finger, at some point in your practice, so if you do lots of like handstands and body weight stuff, which is what I'm doing, just changing the pressure in one finger can change it, but also you know that it's good because I probably don't use that finger enough. I'm leaning to one side a bit more, and so you can choose to go really, really subtle and granular if you want, and that's why we never get bored.
Yes.
You can go deeper and deeper.
Yes, infinite.
Infinite.
It's infinite. The body is infinite.
To the atomic level.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah.
It's like, if you go to music school and live next to a pianist, that you'll probably hear that pianist wake up at 6 a.m. and play the same note for an hour.
Right.
And they're playing that note like 200 different ways.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of taken me a while. It's sort of taken me a while to find my different disciplines, and they've come to me at different points in my life. So, for example, cooking, I came to much later, and food, I came to much later. And it's only in the last few years that I've really enjoyed being in the kitchen, and I'm now working sort of in a community kitchen where I'm chefing twice a week, and just noticing things about like the skills you need to prep and to coordinate and to deliver a big community lunch, which is what we do. Like all the past work that I've put into music, into yoga, into communication, it all comes to the fore. It's all simmering in the same pot. And it's probably why I've been able to like pick up cooking much quicker.
Right.
Whereas I started on the piano at the age of 5, 6, and that's probably been a slower, longer process. Because to pick up all those motor skills, especially as a child, it's a lifelong thing. But then you're building all those connections in your brain, so they're kind of set before you're sort of physically, emotionally mature.
There's like a plasticity. That
plasticity,
pruned as you grow older.
I'm using all these scientific terms that I don't really know, but I know them to be true.
I listen to the Keith
Okay, great. Yeah. Anyway, we know this is true.
But basically, it's harder to learn as you get older.
Yes.
And like you kind of set something from a young age.
So I mean, maybe this is going off topic, but I always think like children should be encouraged to have creative disciplines from a young age, like especially music. Or any kind of like dance music, writing, develop really good communication skills, and that sets you up for much later. Yeah, maybe that helped with the yoga. I don't know. You've got coordination, you've got breathing. Breathing is so important to musicians, especially non-wind players.
Okay.
A lot of musicians don't learn to breathe properly.
Clenching the jaw.
Holding the breath. It's all related. There's bandha involved in playing music as well. Yeah.
Interesting. So you were talking about children and then how children learn, and the thing that delighted me about when I started learning yoga was that even though I was an adult and set, I wasn't set, and my body changed and adapted and grew and developed. For me, it's more exciting because actually I think it's quite common that people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s start doing Ashtanga. So that's what interests me, I think.
I think you definitely see a lot more people like 30s upwards starting Ashtanga, even, as you say, 40s, 50s. And this practice in particular, I think it takes a kind of maturity to commit and to really to see its value. And often it is people who are already going through things in life, transitional periods, or maybe there's trauma events or anything like that. And in a way, then it takes on much more importance to them. So what I like about our room is it's quite an old room comparatively to other yoga classes.
I love that as well.
And it's very international.
Very diverse, I would say. I mean, there's an element of it being quite prohibitively expensive.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a lot of cultures,
Yeah.
and that's what I like as well. Yeah.
I have a theory about that.
Yeah,
Would you like to hear it?
I would love to hear it. Yeah.
I think the Ashtanga room is often a room of, let's say, either immigrants or expats, whichever word you use. I think because, firstly, those people are looking for somewhere to belong, so community. And they are all, if you think about expats / immigrants, they're all exceptionally hardworking, and like they are all type A anyway, because in order to, let's say, leave your home country and to go somewhere,
Need some escape velocity.
yes, you need to be really good at what you do. You need to have applied, persevered, gotten the job, or found a way to get to your desired destination. So in a way, we are all type A, and so waking up at 5 a.m. doesn't really faze a lot of immigrants, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that does make sense. It fits, for sure.
Yeah. I'm going a bit full circle again, and I think things are cyclical. So when I first started the practice, I was also in this stage of life transition. I was moving back to London. I went freelance for the first time in my life. I didn't want to work in this like high-flying fashion, like go career. That's when I started doing stuff for myself. So I started working for myself, working on my own terms, my own hours, my own projects, doing more community work. And yoga was very much part of that journey and helping me to make that decision. So I found that I entirely changed my lifestyle in tandem with that intensifying yoga practice. Probably to the point, after a few years, I was in that ascetic place where I was like, I gotta go to bed now so I can get up at 5 and again. And then after a few years, you realize there's life to be lived. And especially like in the last couple of years, I've been doing way more of the community stuff, again, going into a different career, which is hospitality, which is, I will work late night events sometimes. I will have heavy physical days, working in the kitchen, and also getting older and having this intensifying practice. So sometimes I won't get home till 11:30, 12, or eat till then. And you know what? I'm okay with that, because I had this amazing, interesting day, and if it means I sleep in late, I do a home practice. In a way, I could do home practice now if I wanted. I choose not to, because I still love being in the room. I still really value my teacher and, her help, and being surrounded and supported by and supporting other practitioners. So it's kind of, it is, the practice changes, So for that period of asceticism, I changed everything. My diet really cleaned up.
Could you elaborate on what clean diet might be?
I've always been really health conscious, so it's never been an issue for me. I definitely, when I started the practice, I was almost going vegan. Again, that's changed over the last few years. I try and eat the kinds of proteins that I think are good for my body, so fish, eggs. Recently, I've even, now and again, just have a bite of meat, have some liver. I feel that I really need it. Not loosening, but like making my own mind up about what is good for me.
Not being dogmatic.
Not being dogmatic, learning the dogma, and then making my own mind up about it. Because there's a lot of like sheep mentality, especially in a community like Ashtanga, where there can be rigidity. And evangelism. And I think my vices still are caffeine.
Love it though.
I love it, and I can subsist on very little sleep. I've been able to practice on very little sleep. I've actually had some of my best practices on very little sleep, but I will crash for 2 days afterwards.
Right.
So it's a short-term solution. If you can sneak in the afternoon nap.
Love it.
Yeah. But the main thing I also try and avoid is sugar, because I think you can often resort to sugar when you're tired.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think I'm still in this place where, physically I can do almost everything I want to, but it's starting to slow down.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
As you know, I'm turning 40 very soon, and
Congratulations.
I think age is a number, but also there are actual limitations.
Yeah, there are limits, and I suppose it's just about listening to your body, isn't it? Seeing what it's telling you. When I went to your house, when you had a party, you had some friends around, I looked in your fridge and I noticed that it was basically all fermented food.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I was like, all right, that's how she does it. That's
yeah.
Would you say that how important is like fermenting and live food for you?
Well, I think being able to cook and learning about nutrition on your own terms is probably the most important thing in terms of dietary health. Like, I try and cook and eat my own food probably 90% of the time. Ideally, I can go out for one meal a week and that's the max. Now I have a lot of socializing, sometimes it's more than that, and I just, once you know what goes into restaurant food, you'll realize it's not that great for you. But learning to cook, cooking with all your senses, knowing what you enjoy, having variety on your plate, learning to love vegetables as well. This is a cultural thing, I think. From a young age, I was eating vegetables cooked Cantonese style. You probably had, Cantonese cooking, and it's just like, I've never met a Cantonese child who hated vegetables, because the way it's cooked, it's like stir-fried, you have really nice light seasoning, ingredients are always really fresh, diverse, you've got different textures going in the mouth, and I've always loved broccoli, because, if you learn how to cook broccoli the right way, it's not an issue. So I just love playing with vegetables and doing things like fermenting or turning them into sauces, picking them, and then finding ways to eat them.
Yeah, nice. I do find that when I eat loads of fermented food and loads of sprouts, like microgreens and stuff, I feel just so much better. Like, it's noticeable.
Do you not feel bloated?
I actually don't. I think there's an adaptation phase when I start reintroducing them again, and I'll feel a bit bloated and
farty.
Fart. Generally, it's good for me.
Good poo is very important. For Ashtangis.
Yeah, exactly. First thing you've got to do in the morning.
Yeah.
It's not talked. Everyone thinks it, but it's not talked about.
Yeah. Well, the reason we drink so much coffee is like.
Got to go in the morning.
Advice to newbies is like, learn Mysore style. And try and really practice in the moment, meaning in this age of having, so much information to hand. Again, when I started, you already had people like Kino and sharing stuff online, but not to the extent today where there is so much information online about the practice, the history, the different theories. It can be a bit too much information. What a lot of practitioners do, I suspect, is actually look at the sheets and look at the last posture and go, that's where I'm going. But actually, maybe you should just turn up on the mat and listen to your teacher and wait until she gives you some advice, and then say, okay, now here's the next one. And, maybe it's good not to know what the next posture is.
Yeah, that sounds quite a traditional, or just quite sensible way of kind of renouncing to a teacher. And I suppose it's traditional in the sense that if you would have a guru, you would give up any sort of agency and just do what they say, kind of thing.
And at the same time, be sensible about it. Question respectfully.
Yeah.
I always like this Richard Freeman quote, which is, yoga will ruin your life. You can read that, several ways. It will obviously enrich your life, but also you can go all in and really forget about the living life off the mat. So that's one thing. Another one from a book called Mastery by George Lombard, which you know. And it's such a quotable book, but the whole book is about the point of mastery, which is not about perfection, it's about the process. And I think there is a whole chapter which is about the plateau and the benefit of the plateau. The plateau where you think you're stuck, but actually you are growing in so many ways because just by being and committing to the plateau, you are, in a way, spiritually progressing.
Right. Yeah.
And so many times, I've felt like, I'm plateauing on this piece of music, or I'm plateauing in life, and what's the point? But the point is, you're in it, you've already chosen to be in that moment. So it's not plateauing.
That's really useful.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that I've worried about.
Yeah.
I think it's a natural thing to worry about when you're doing a practice where there is like a
sequence
progression, and then you're stuck. Well, for me, I'm like stuck on a posture for like a few years, and I'm like, what's the point? And maybe this is my set point. Maybe I can't go.
The point of the plateau is necessary and what happens is often there's like a blip, and you go, breakthrough. And then you plateau for a while, and then breakthrough. But eventually, we decline. So,
Well, there's, James Clear wrote Atomic Habits, and he talked about 2 different types of curves. And in terms of skill learning, you have like a logarithmic curve. So basically, you might make loads of beginner gains or like beginner stuff.
Exactly.
And then it will tail off. And then the other one, which is, I'm not sure if it really relates to Ashtanga in a way, but is exponential curve. And I suppose in a way it does, because if you're just practicing every single day and you ingrain it in your being, there is a point where I think it just kind of naturally expresses through you, and just clicks and becomes part of your nature. So maybe that would describe the exponential progress. All right, so we finished the official interview, but then it went off piste, and it was also very interesting. So
so I was saying, the reason I love the physical asana practice is because it allows my body to be fully expressive, and the reason I love Ashtanga in particular is, the extremes to which you can push your body, and I love any kind of extension, any pointing, any flexing, lifting, and I've realised that this is so much about me being able to take up space, physical space on the mat, but also in life. Over the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years, I've been on this journey to take up space as a person, and this is manifested in my writing, in my music, in my being very vocal about many issues. And I think this is something that people of colour, especially women, struggle with in somewhere like the UK. So it never occurred to me that and that was probably why I was enjoying the practice and that kind of progress, and it also, this is related, like, I've never been competitive with anyone but myself, but I've realised I'm also competitive with men.
With men?
Yeah, because I've always been told, or, women are always told, like, men are physically superior, physically, better at you in every way, and to be honest, I can do things that men absolutely cannot do. Strength-wise, flexibility-wise, I can do it all. So that gives me a lot of pleasure. I've had people who don't know me, like, just boast about, I don't know, handstands, whatever, and then look at them doing handstands and be like, your form is shit. You should watch me doing handstands. Sorry, I will allow myself that sort of boast.
I am white male, and so obviously very different, but I definitely relate to the element of taking up space. I just have like flashbacks to when I was younger, where I'd be like, I want to do weird things with my body, and like move it through its. I didn't have the words for it, but like move it through its full range of motion. Just not be like, when you do weird stuff with your body, like, people look at you like, what are you doing?
Even when I find that when you're in a public situation and I just want to like stretch or squat, it's frowned upon.
Oh, definitely in the West.
Yeah, but when you go to Asia and you just squat, that's just how you rest.
Yeah, exactly, And also there's like some things that you can do with your body that might be perceived or judged as feminine, and that's very much frowned upon as a man, or like that's something I've internalized. And what I love about yoga is like the postures you do, you kind of have to do them.
Can't avoid them.
and it's good to
Yeah.
do that with your body. It just feels nice.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think what's interesting, now we're going into it, is that in the postures themselves are actually either masculinized or feminized.
Yeah.
And there's this idea of prana, apana, and it's
Yeah.
the opposing forces, you know,
Yeah.
sun and moon. But overall, everyone has to do everything.
Yes.
So I don't know why backbending is, you know, feminine. Or as I see it in popular culture, it's feminized.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more just like, for instance, like pigeon type things. You know, it's like I remember.
Stretchy things.
Yeah, like I won't name my friend. He's a dear friend of mine. You know, we were young, and like it's just part of the culture growing up. Maybe we did a cycle ride, and then I just like really needed to stretch, and then I did a pigeon pose, and he was like, "That's gay." You know, I'm like, yeah. It's just
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's
Anyway.
so funny.
anyway.
And yet now everyone who plays football is now like, oh, stretching's so important.
But
No
that-
shit.
That is the beauty of social media and of the
Yeah.
internet. However many pitfalls it does and traps for someone like me who does find it difficult to not be addicted, the beauty is the connection, the sharing of information and things like that.
Yeah.
You were saying earlier that
Yes.
our teacher, Corey, was asking you questions
Yeah.
for her PhD. In my master's degree, like a couple of years ago, I learnt this reflective cycle. It's designed to be used for learning experiences. It was literally the most valuable thing I learned in my whole master's degree. Like up the whole like £11,500 worth of master's degree. I could have just gone on the internet and learned this. Basically, what I love about, because I practice Vipassana meditation and I practice Ashtanga yoga, both of those things for me generate wisdom in me. I found that this reflective cycle, and I'm sure there are many other reflective cycles that do this, the output of this reflective cycle is wisdom. And it's like a verbal shortcut to wisdom. I think it's called the Gibbs reflective cycle. And I was really tempted to like send you that
Oh.
and then do these interviews and stuff. So maybe in the future I'll do something like that because it seems like you're very reflective and wise. You're good at internalizing your own experience, and
I'm going to go and look that up.
I would definitely recommend it. Yeah, so you write a description of what happened, like just a description, nothing internal what you're thinking or feeling, just a description, play by play. Then the next section is your thoughts and feelings of the things that happened. And that thoughts and feelings get part into like how I felt before and afterwards. You know, like really going into minute detail. And then the next one is evaluating your experience. What went well, what went badly. And then there are other evaluating questions. Then the next one is analysing why did it go well, why didn't it go well.
Gosh.
And so you're literally like forensically going through it. Then what is the conclusion that you can draw from this experience? And then next is what's the action plan you can do.
Oh my God. So what kind of experiences are we talking about?
So what I ended up doing it with, because I also have a journaling practice where I wake up and I just write. And I started actually just doing it for my whole day, just like going through when I have the time to do it, because it's actually quite a lengthy process. And I'm trying to refine it in a way where it's, because there's this journaling technique called bullet journaling. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Because obviously you can't write everything. It's not practical, write every single thing that happens in your life.
Yeah.
But it is very useful to extract wisdom from your experience. So it could just be like the most emotionally illicit experiences, or like something that's novel. You know, like
Maybe
for instance, we're having a really interesting conversation. Maybe I'll go and do it with this and be like, what wisdom can I derive from it? You know?
Maybe I'll do that as well.
Yeah, I recommend it. Yeah, that's my.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Cool.
Good.